Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Já jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi.
Babi, musíš tam na to kliknout.
Ne, na to druhý.
Vypadáváš.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the 14th edition of One World International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival in Brussels, I would like to welcome you at today's discussion. One World is organized by People in Need in cooperation with the Czech Center Brussels, the European Parliament, and the permanent representation of the Czech Republic to the EU. Today's debate that we bring to you is organized together with European Parliament and Human Rights House Foundation. During the debate, you will also be able to ask the questions to our distinguished panel that I will introduce in a minute. You can do it through the comments under the video on Facebook, on YouTube, or through the application Slido. And information how to access it will be available on the screen. Our team will be taking your questions and sharing them with me, and I will be able to ask them to our panelists on your behalf. Today's discussion is dedicated to an extremely relevant topic that we've been following for a very long time. The discussion is on impunity in Belarus and what can the EU do in this regard. I will be moderating the discussion. My name is Nadia Ivanova, and I'm the Deputy Director of the People in Need Center for Human Rights and Democracy. Since even before the elections of the August 9th, we as international community have been following very closely the brutal and somewhat unprecedented crackdown and the violence that Lukashenko's regime employed against his first political opponents and then after the election against regular citizens who went to the streets to try and defend their civil freedoms and human rights. 10 months after, the pressure on the civil society and independent media still persists and is actually increasing exponentially. So how does this situation look from inside Belarus, and what can the European communities and European Union itself do to support civil society there? These and other topics we will be discussing today with our distinguished panel of 5 guests, and I would like to introduce them to you. First, we have Ales Belatsky, founder of Vyasna Human Rights Center, a laureate of numerous international human rights awards like Sakharov Freedom Award, Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, and Homo Homini. Welcome, Ales. Second, we have Eugen Merkis, the freelance journalist who works for Belsat TV and other independent media in Belarus. Welcome, Eugen. We also have Victoria Fedorova, a head of NGO Legal Initiative and one of the founders of International Committee for the Investigation of Torture in Belarus. Thank you, Victoria, for coming. And we also have 2 guests from European side. First, we have Luděk Niedermayer, Czech politician and economist, a member of European Parliament for the Czech Republic, and substitute member of the delegation of European Parliament for relations with Belarus. Welcome, Mr. Niedermayer. And last but not least, we have Petras Auštrevičius, a Lithuanian politician and diplomat, member of European Parliament for Lithuania, and European Parliament's standing rapporteur for Belarus. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. I will be asking for first round of questions, and then hopefully our audience will also join us. So my first question would be for you, Mr. Bilatsky. It has been almost 10 months since the falsified presidential election occurred and Belarusian people went to the streets to defend their rights and freedoms. What is the situation of political prisoners and people who try to protect them, mainly lawyers and human rights defenders?
Добрый день.
Hello. Thank you for coming to listen to our discussion. I am in Minsk. I'm in the middle of the events which are unfolding in Belarus. And in fact, the whole year we have been sitting on a volcano because the degree of persecutions of civil society, it cannot be compared to anything. If you remember, in spring last year, we had 3 political prisoners when we fought for having them freed. But this year, the number of people who have convicted in political trials is reaching hundreds and probably even more than 1,000. And even today, as of today, the General Prosecution Service of Belarus has initiated around 3,000 prosecutions. Those prosecutions are rooted in mass riots, as they call it, and they also list other circumstances which are classified as crime, although the target of those charges are bloggers, civil society, journalists, students, in fact, the whole civil society, and criminal trials which are happening right now, and there are many. They take place all over the country. If you look at data, just in May, just based on our numbers, and unfortunately these numbers are not complete, it is just the information that we were able to get or monitored, 111 people have been convicted in political cases with political charges, political context. These are criminal trials and people were sentenced to long jail sentences, and they're kept in jails in Belarus with terrible conditions for inmates. We also have cases of administrative infractions. So those are administrative hearings which usually end up in detention between 15 to 30 days, and people also have to pay penalties, huge penalties of maybe 1,000, 2,000 euros. Compare that to the average salary of 500 euros a month. Also, constant searches, constant attack of news media. For example, last week, by 15 journalists and employees of the newsroom had been put in custody. We have inexplicable deaths in prison establishments. We have people, for example, last week we had a suicide case of a 17-year-old who gave in to pressure of the investigative committee. So this pressure on civil society is growing, and if you look for a parallel, you can maybe compare it to what was happening in Czechoslovakia immediately after the 1968 events, when dozens of people were detained, and now people are leaving Belarus. They're afraid, and as of today, thousands of Belarusians are leaving the country because they're afraid of this pressure. They're afraid to end up in prison. And of course, human rights defenders in Belarus feel the same pressure. For example, charges have been brought against our human rights organization as well as ours. 4 people from Vyasna are kept in custody right now. our volunteers. We also don't know what is the possible outcome of this case. We expect to take another hit. The same applies to other human rights organizations. For example, the head of an organization which works with people with disabilities is also, in fact, detained, and the lawyer of that organization have been put in jail. So this pressure is not getting any smaller, and it is a way of the authorities to get hold or re-get hold of the country. And it brings us back to the 1960s, back to the Soviet Union, to the totalitarian system which tried to suppress anything, any thought that was different. But it is more difficult to do for them now because millions of Belarusians said they are against repression. They are against this. They want to punish those who torture detainees. But unfortunately, modus operandi of the authorities is the same as what we saw in August last year. We constantly get information about torture, inhumane attitude, pressure on activists. So the situation is very difficult. And last week, the events around the airplane that was hijacked when Roman Protasevich, the journalist, and his girlfriend were detained, this actually was a step across some line, and we will still get back to that in this discussion. And we put a lot of hope into help from international community. And when Czechs back in 1968 were calling for help, democratic, pro-democratic activists and European community then protested against Czechoslovak or invasion of Czechoslovakia, and the same applies to us. We hope that they will help us stop the regime and stop this repression. We are at the highlight of the repression. It is culminating. We have hundreds of trials, cases of torture of detainees. It feels like the authorities have abandoned moral norms. They are trying to do everything they can. They use any means available to remain in power, and we are quickly becoming a North Korea in Eastern Europe, where law does not apply, where society is locked up and authorities do whatever they want. So it is a sad situation, but on the other hand, I want to say that people are not willing to put up with this anymore. Society is scared. Yes, the number of protests has decreased because of the cruelty of suppression, because of persecution of participants, but people feel it. People talk about it. And even small chat groups and social media is something that the authorities cannot control. And when I talk to people, I see that people disagree with this situation. So you have the authorities on the one side of the barricades and the society is on the other. And this instability, this political instability in society, it is acute, and the political crisis in Belarus keeps unfolding.
Thank you very much, Alice. My next question would be to Johan, and it's a little bit of following on something that Alice already mentioned. So recently we have witnessed an intensified crackdown on independent media. Many of them are blocked in Belarus. Some of them are facing intense prosecution, like already mentioned, Tudbay or Belsat, that she'll cooperate with. Furthermore, last week, Lukashenko signed new legislation prohibiting any reporting on protests. And of course, some of the journalists and media are accused of extremism and terrorism, like Roman Protasevich, who was kidnapped last weekend. what does it mean for the information flow in the country? And is it still possible for Belarusians to access independent information?
I'll start with answering your last part of the question. Well, it's still possible to get news and any information about what is going on in Belarus and the whole world. There are still independent mass media present in Belarus, although some of them have been blocked, their websites have been blocked. Like, for example, the website of the Belsat TV channel, they try to fight with it by changing the domain name. But it works only for a little bit of time. People living in Belarus also get their information thanks to the social media, especially with Telegram, social media that everybody has access on their mobile phones. And it became very popular after what happened in August 2020, because it's safe. You get all the information just in text form, and it is also very safe and easy to use in times when the internet connection is not working stable, or the whole internet is blocked, like we had in the first 3 days in August after the presidential election, when just the whole country didn't have any access to the internet. So there are still ways of getting information, but of course they are restricted, and the regime tries to fight with it. And what happened to Dubai, one of the biggest media in the whole region, even comparing with Ukraine and Russia, you can't find that easy mass media that could be compared with Dubai. To what possible consequences it will lead? It will lead to the following ones. The majority of people will try to get their information on other websites, and especially on different Telegram channels. And of course, many of them are not that good at fact-checking and on proofing all the information they get from different sources. So, of course, the quality of the information that is present there is not always that good as it was, for example, on the Dubai news website. And it will also lead to a possible radicalization, because you can't control what everybody is posting in those Telegram channels. People will disperse into different Telegram channels, so it will be even worse for the regime to understand what people are actually interested about, what are they concerned about, because many people had big trust towards Dubai. They shared their problems with that particular mass media, and nowadays you don't have any other big mass media left in Belarus just to share your problems to, and these problems could possibly lead to protest actions, starting with local protests when people didn't get their salary paid, or other local problems. So the regime has lost one of the ways of understanding what people are actually concerned about, how are they doing, and where the next possible threat for them would be.
Thank you, Johan. Veronica, I would also to follow a little bit on what Ales mentioned about the unprecedented torture. Protests in August last year were followed by this volume of torture and ill treatment of detainees that basically shook the world. And how has Belarusian NGOs been documenting these atrocities, and what is the ultimate goal of this documentation?
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having me and for this opportunity to highlight all these problems faced by Belarus in the fights of freedom. In August 2020, with my colleagues, we formed a coalition of organizations named the International Committee for Investigation of Torture in Belarus. The main task of committee are documentation of torture and also legal assistance to victims. Since August, we have documented 1,300 torture cases, and we still continue this work because torture didn't stop in August, unfortunately. And to understand this volume of torture, I give you just some numbers. According to official data, on August 17, in 1 week since protests, more than 700 people filed official complaints to investigative committee. In September, almost 2,000 torture complaints. And these numbers do not reflect the real number of torture, the real level of torture, because the victims are afraid to apply to official state bodies, because they're afraid of repression, criminal cases against them. So now we can talk about thousands of torture cases in Belarus. Nevertheless, there is still no information about initiation of even one criminal case on the fact of torture. Neither Lukashenko or General Prosecutor Office or Minister of Internal Affairs made any public statement condemning the use of torture. Moreover, on the contrary, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, Karpenkov, said that they want to create concentration camp for protesters and that Lukashenko authorized to use lethal force against protesters. This is the situation of Belarus. There is, on the national level, we don't have any hope that responsible for torture, for mass torture, for killings, for inhuman treatment of prisoners will be responsible and will be accountable for such actions. So I also want to draw attention that we are not talking now only about human rights violations. It's now crimes against humanity. So this mass torture, killings, persecution for political grounds, this is actions which took place in framework of official state policy of Belarus. And unfortunately, since March, we as international committee also faced persecution, and part of team left the country, including those people who conduct interviews with victims. Nevertheless, we still continue our work, and like ultimate goal for our committee, for human rights defenders, is to bring perpetrators to justice. As I said earlier, it's no doubt at the national level, it's impossible to achieve justice. So the only hope for us, for Belarusian citizens, it's international mechanisms and also universal jurisdiction, which allows to investigate and prosecute serious crimes, regardless of where they are committed. And we have some good cases. For example, the prosecutor general of Lithuania launched a pretrial investigation in the case of Maxim Horoshin and also some other cases. German prosecutors may be looking to open preliminary inquiry into the alleged serious abuses of human rights as a result of complaint of individuals alleging of torture. And also in May, a submission to International Criminal Court was sent on the situation in Belarus, Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, and Ukraine. It's a submission about crimes against humanity of deportation and persecution. A lot of people were forced to leave our country, and also at least 6 opposition leaders, including President-elect Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, were physically taken to the board and expelled from Belarusian authorities. And some new initiatives, of course, it's UN fact-finding mission, which was started in May, and some experts were appointed. This mission will conduct examination of all these alleged human rights violations, and I hope that we, as part of international platform, international accountability platform for Belarus, will collaborate with UN fact-finding mission to collect, consolidate, and verify all documented information. And we, as human rights defenders, will use all available mechanisms to send a strong message to perpetrators that the days of committing crimes against humanity with impunity are numbered. So everyone should be responsible for all these crimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on this with Mr. Auštrevičius. Continuing on that, what mechanisms and legal means of justice can European Union employ to punish the perpetrators of continuous human rights violations in Belarus? And can the platform on the fight against impunity in Belarus launched by the European Parliament help?
Well, thank you so much for having me along with other great speakers on this issue. As we speak, Belarus is turning into the prison for its own nation. That's clear. You probably remember this famous expression that Russian Empire was a prison of nations. Belarus becomes a prison of the nation, of the Belarusian nation. And in fact, there are serious grounds for major concern about the human rights violations and situation in Belarus. I will quote probably one of the most important documents recently published, which comes from the 4th of May this year. And it is a report of the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus made by Ani Marhan, United Nations Human Rights Council rapporteur on Belarus. And quoting this report, which is quite extensive and comprehensive on the situation in Belarus, the para 97, I quote, "The special rapporteur is deeply alarmed at the unprecedented escalation of human rights violations in Belarus witnessed during the period under review," and the period is for 1 year time. And there are, in fact, recommendations or requirements, again, very, very extensive, as to release immediately and conditionally political prisoners, end up administrative prosecution, conduct impartial investigation, and so on and so forth. I mean, situation is really serious, and between of us, there are no signs of turnaround or any, slowdown from the Lukashenko regime. In opposite, I think after recent meeting in Sochi, he came back again, somehow empowered probably by support of Putin, and we shouldn't expect any, liberalization in Belarus. So I expect that things might develop absolutely into opposite direction, as we can see even during recent days, a ban to leave Belarus for citizens, series of trials against prosecuted persons, brutalities continues, and so on and so forth. So that's why I think we have to establish and to employ series of instruments still available on our side, on the side of international community and the European Union in particular, in order to try to deter, to in fact to stop those actions initiated by Lukashenko. And of course, the most general classical sanction is sanctions regime. You know that EU is busy with the 4th and 5th packages. Hopefully it will be absolutely different by quantitatively and qualitatively speaking from the first 3 packages. I think we have more than enough arguments for this kind of change, and I'm looking forward to hear any news, since Council is mainly ready with the that decision which might come. Second instrument which was mentioned already is the universal jurisdiction, and it's good that Germany joined Lithuania as the first country to try to apply this instrument. We heard about very angry reaction from Minsk once German prosecutors in fact announced about the examination of wider Belarus abuses. It's absolutely inadequate reaction from the Lukashenko side, but it shows that it's really painful, and we have to continue. I'm looking forward for more member states of the European Union and probably on the international scale to employ this universal jurisdiction. It might be less probably efficient because the access to those perpetrators is denied, it's restricted, but it gives a very clear message of the response from the international community. The third instrument which is available, and it was announced some time ago, it's International Accountability Platform, led by two Belarusian and two international organizations. It's mainly, and the purpose of this platform is to collect information and evidence before they disappear. And we are speaking about the evidence of brutal harassment, brutal, beatings, executions against those detained, and in particular political activists and civil activists. So it's important, I mean, to have this kind of archive of torture, okay, with the evidence, with the timeline, with facts, kind of quality-based collection of the information. And the fourth instrument I want to touch upon, it's in fact European Parliament's initiated platform for fight against impunity. And this is again a platform which is about assessment of the human rights situation, performing functions of coordination and contact center for stakeholders from Belarus and international actors working in Belarus, and expert advice and mentoring for Belarusian human rights defenders and other civil society activists. The later instrument is still in progress, in making. It's not final. The political decision is already made, but procedurally speaking, we still need to put final elements in it in order to have a working and efficient platform or instrument. So that's why looking forward to work on our in our institution, in the European Parliament, and mainly the Human Rights Committee, which is in charge of this instrument, in order to come up with probably more evidence-based our activities. These probably would be major instruments which we have, and not one, as you can see. It's important, I mean, to use them effectively every time to react to events, sometimes to, in fact, make some moves in advance as prevention, and finally, in fact, to have registration in order to prepare ourselves for those court cases and presenting, evidence on crimes against human rights violators, as well as humanity, as it rightly mentioned by some speakers as well.
Thank you, Mr. Auštrevičius. Mr. Niedermayer, I want to follow up a little bit on that and focus on the sanctions. European Union imposed a number of targeted sanctions against Lukashenko's regime, Currently, as Mr. Auštrevičius mentioned, there are ongoing preparations for imposing sectoral economic sanctions against important industries for Belarusian economy. How do you, as an economist and as a member of European Parliament, evaluate the efficiency of sanctions, and what should EU target next?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Obviously, I share completely Petra's view how terrible the situation in Belarus is, and I'm deeply sad about it. And I have great respect for courage of people of Belarus that are not giving up and are keeping protesting. This is really fantastic, and I hope and I believe that at the end of the day, they will be able to win back their future. Because currently living in the prison is not a good future, really. But let me share with you some view rather of the economist, because I cannot compete with Petras on his political view over the situation, and also we will have just one of the next Belarus meeting this week, so this would be rather my comments. And just before we started, I look at the economic data, and I was very shocked how terrible situation in Belarus is. I don't know actually so many, if in any country, that would see such a weak economic data. You know, nominal GDP per capita below $7,000 in 2019 compared to, for example, 24,000 in the Czech Republic. What's even worse, since 2014 to 2019, there was absolutely no growth, neither of GDP per capita or nominal GDP. You know, even Ukraine, the suffering the war initiated and maintained by the Russia, has a positive growth. Russia itself has also growth. Growth at the same time in the Czech Republic was around 20%. So this all shows not only beating people on the street, that is completely unacceptable, but also the economy that is influencing the living standard of people of Belarus, show how terrible is performance of Lukashenko as the guy who is deciding about what's going on in the Belarus. It's just terrifying how bad is it. So what can we do? I should say that first of all, in Europe we can do only anything if we agree. But I hope that the situation in Belarus is so terrible that it will be possible to strike the agreement on some really visible measures. And I hope the next package will be more clear and more powerful. Personally, I must say that with Belarus, we can see one big problem, because this is the economy and country, not country, but rather economy that is relatively detached. And I will talk about it. So that's why we have a problem to, even in theory, have a very efficient economic sanction, because the economic ally of Lukashenko and country managed by him is Russia. That is really the strongest trade partner, while EU accounts only for around 20% of the trade. And plus, and I will get to that later, the figures are really small, because thanks to Lukashenko, the country is poor, and obviously it shouldn't be being on the borders of European Union. I'm a big supporter of personal sanctions, first of all, as a reaction of non-acceptable behavior. And if I could be the one who would decide, I guess every policeman on the street that is beating innocent people should be on the sanction list. Even the speakers on TV, I'm from time to time watching what is going on Belarus TV. I guess these are the guys that are supporting this terrible regime, and they should be on the sanction list. It has also economic dimension. I guess it's not so much the case in Belarus like in Russia, but in Russia, a lot of people that are affiliated with the regime of Mr. Putin don't trust the regime enough to have his personal wealth in Russia. So they put a lot of money very often to EU, to the banks, to the financial assets, and obviously part of this sanctions should be freezing of any assets that could be traceable to people on the sanction list. So there is that economic risk. But otherwise, looking at the big sanctions, as I said, the complication is that extent of trade between the EU and Belarus is relatively small. Just for comparison, the amount of trade is measured in single-digit billions of euros. For comparison, just amount of cars that is exported every year by the Czech Republic to mostly EU market is 40 billion, almost 40 billion. So it's a very, very small trade, and it is around 1/5 of the trade, while 50% of the trade is with Russia. So as long as Russia will keep trading with Belarus, and maybe even possibly replace some of the trade that could be subject to sanctions, there would not be sufficient quantity of the pressure on Lukashenko regime. So this is the problem. Other factor that is quite important, and this plays in favor of the European sanction, is very weak external financial position of Belarus. That's complicated, but to say it simply, level of Belarus reserve, foreign exchange reserves is very small. I guess it's around 7 or again single-digit billions of euros. While, for example, Czech Republic has reserves above 100 billion euros. So that's why the Belarus economy doesn't need only the trade with Russia, but it needs the trade for which they get euros. So this is rather speaking in favor of impact of the economic sanction, because even small amounts of money can play the role. So I hope that the decision that will be taken in the second half of this month will be substantial, because not to use one of the few weapons that we have that can work if it's targeted properly would be a big mistake. And I'm saying that despite of the fact that obviously in EU among the enterprises, the sanctions are not popular, and I would strongly call for the governments to compensate the firms that will suffer financial losses due to sanctions. Again, as I said, what is in our favor is that extent of trade is relatively small. As I said, what is really unfortunate, but it's in my view Mr. Putin who is the gatekeeper of this conflict. And it seems to me, unfortunately, and this is my reading, and I'm here as an economist, not so much as a politician. In my reading, Putin is supporting not people of Belarus, he's supporting Lukashenko. And as long as it stays, there will be a really problem to come with something that will be strong enough to push for quick change. And this is the big problem. So I still believe, and I want to repeat, I admire the courage of people like you, and not giving up even despite of growing brutality. I guess we should do all we can do, and people like Petras are doing great in trying to explore any possibility. I hope we will not give up the economic sanctions that are stronger than just the personal sanctions, and I hope we will help you win your future, because currently there is not a good future for people in Belarus, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niedermayer. We have some questions from the public. The first one goes to our Belarusian participants. How are the sanctions against Belarus with regard to Belarusian airspace received by civil society? And I want to add a little bit on that. How generally do you think, what was the reaction to the situation with Roman Protasevich, and what are the expectations of Belarusian civil society towards international community with regards to his arrest? Maybe let's start with Alice.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So are you asking about the Belarusian civil society, how they view the sanctions, or the international view of the sanctions?
The question from the public was about Belarusian civil society, Belarusian society general, and their reaction to the sanctions. And my question additional was about what is the perception of civil society in Belarus? What should international community do with regards to Roman Protasevich's situation?
The
sanctions which have been imposed regarding airspace and those restrictions, they have actually followed up on COVID restrictions and the number of people who have been vaccinated is very low. It's around 5 to 6% of those who have received their first jab, and also a low number of those who have received their second dose. So the number is much lower than our EU neighbors like Lithuania or Poland. The numbers are also, the numbers of vaccinated people is lower than in Russia. So COVID actually stopped Belarus last year, and now this blockage, this stoppage have just changed its color. Now it's a political stoppage, because basically the state airline is not allowed to fly into the EU, so we can now fly east to Egypt, to Turkey, to Russia. Those are the countries that are still willing to receive Belarusian planes. It is difficult to talk about the general atmosphere in society, because many people were so poor that they were not able to afford flying abroad. And the numbers that we heard here regarding the economic condition is, those numbers are very sad. And in Minsk, if you have the average salary of maybe 500 to 600 euros a month, but outside of the capital, people with a university degree are offered 200 euros a month. So if you make this kind of money, you cannot afford going abroad, going on holiday. So the problem with closing down airspace, it only touches upon a smaller part of society, and 80% of society were not flying anywhere before, so they are not bothered by not being able to fly now. So we have COVID-related restrictions, and they're still in place. So really, Belarusian citizens are locked up. They cannot take a train or drive or take the bus out of the country. So this is more sensitive. And we will see how the situation develops, how the EU imposes its restrictions on travel. We do not have reliable sociological data, so it is difficult to talk about the general mood in society. But if you look at those people who are active, people who I see in Telegram channels, on Instagram, on Facebook, so the active part of society, it shows understanding. They understand that these restrictions are primarily aimed at the authorities, not at the people. So those steps that are aimed at punishing the authorities, they should be accompanied by steps to help just normal people. For example, to give them visas if they need to travel to the EU for their own reasons. Because this humanitarian warmth of this hearth of the EU, it has always kept our society warm. So it is a way of charging our humanitarian battery of our society. So it is important to keep this source going, to keep this flame going, that the restrictions do not hit citizens. And regarding the story with hijacking the plane, the opinions that I see, but of course this is not political commentators, this is just what normal people say, and they see it as revenge, that Lukashenko wanted to hit back, to hit journalists, because Raman was one of the active journalists. He was active on Nexta. He was an editor. And you have this channel which was called, it had a funny name, Belarus of the Brain, but it was popular and you could get information there, information that criticized the regime and Lukashenko. So Lukashenko sees Roman Protasevich as the personal enemy. So this decision to ground the plane, it was revenge. It was an attempt to scare other journalists, other people who spread independent information, and people understand that. They see that the dictator took his personal revenge on an independent journalist.
Thank you very much. Victoria, we have a question about the chance of exercising universal jurisdiction over the mass human rights violations, such as torture. But my additional question would also be, can the universal jurisdiction work in case of Roman Protasevich and the kidnapped flight?
First of all, about the universal jurisdiction, I think chances is quite high, because this legal principle give opportunity to every country to persecute persons regardless where crime committed and who is victim and who is perpetrator. So it's a very good one. But of course, it's quite political issue, because it's no like automatic opening of case. So each prosecutor, general prosecutor office, or another state body decided to open case or not to open case. And talking about Roman Protasevich, it can be noted that, as I said earlier about International Criminal Court submission, after this situation with Roman Protasevich, additional information was to submit to International Criminal Court in connection with this situation, because in this like detention of Roman, country of airplane were involved, and I think it was Poland. So it's a party of Rome Statute. So International Criminal Court can exercise its jurisdiction over these crimes. So I think it will be a very good, strong message if International Criminal Court start preliminary investigation over Belarusian situation, because it's very good message for, of course, for Lukashenko, as a so-called leader of our state, that The Hague, the main international criminal institution, start investigation over his crimes. But of course, all these procedures, universal jurisdiction procedures and also International Criminal Court procedures, will take a lot of time. So we should know it and be ready for a long time.
Thank you. We also have a little bit of a follow-up question for Yauhen. Does Poland do enough to advocate for the release of detained Belarusian journalists, and what concrete actions could Warso undertake to help them?
Well, if we're speaking about Poland, of course, the Polish government and various representatives of the civil society are doing their best to help all people in Belarus who had to suffer because of repressions. We have constant support. For example, the picture of Roman Protasevich was placed in public places in Warsaw and other Polish cities. But in the current situation, the current state, the only thing the Polish civil society or various organizations can do are just continuing to spread the information about what is actually going on in Belarus, because during the last months we have seen that nothing can actually force Lukashenko to change his behavior or his deeds in a fast manner, because he's now concerned only about staying in power, and he will do anything. He won't stop, even from capturing airplanes, like we've seen in the case of Roman Protasevich.
Thank you very much. I also have a follow-up question for our MEPs. Both of you mentioned an unprecedented support that Putin and Russia gives to Belarus, both economically but also politically. and you even named Putin as a gatekeeper to the whole crisis. Do you think European Union will consider at some point to make Russia a part of the discussions about sanctions and about the mechanisms how to pressure Lukashenko through pressuring Putin or through pressuring Russia to give up his seat?
Thank you. If I may, definitely. I believe this is it's a case. It's a clear case, and I, sincerely hope that the European Union increasingly will recognize this tendency and this dependency of Lukashenko's regime on Putin. Lukashenko would survive not a single day if Putin doesn't support him. So that's why, I mean, interlinkage is very clear. So that's why there is even now a certain responsibility, if not a big one, on the shoulders of Kremlin on what is going on in Belarus. We know, I mean, from starting days after events in August, Kremlin stood strongly behind Lukashenko regime in different ways, providing information support, financial support, giving political support whatsoever, and in other many means we probably don't know, but I'm sure that there is even a very close cooperation between the secret services of those countries, and many methods probably employed earlier by Putin are simply given as a good example to follow for Lukashenko. So I think the European Union should be not, looking at Lukashenko as a single case. We should look a bit broader. Both regimes, Putin's and Lukashenko regimes, are very interlinked. They use probably different methods at different times, but nevertheless, there are more similarities than differences between of them. So that's why I believe it's a high time for the European Union to establish this kind of conditionality approach as well to Russia, as long as Kremlin supports Lukashenko at the expense of human rights and those brutalities which are going on in Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. Niedermayer.
I guess Petras is much more experienced, and he's much more focused on that political dimension. Let me just add that currently we can see that relationship between EU and Russia is really not good. After a rather horrific visit of Mr. Borrell in Moscow, I guess we know, at least even he knows who we are talking to. So unfortunately, Russia stays behind continuing conflict in Ukraine that is costing thousands of lives. Russia doesn't hesitate to interfere into member states, even such a way as we have experienced a few years ago in Czech Republic, when Russian agents initiated the bomb explosion in the military deposit. So I fully agree with what Petra said, that Russia is really the key one who is supporting Lukashenko, and he would not stay in power, as he said, a single day. But I'm afraid that there are now so many divisive points between us and Russia, and it only means something that Petras also somehow indicated, that we need more comprehensive and more clear and more effective policy vis-a-vis Russia. We don't have it. We have seen that even some very senior EU officials were naive about what means the regime of Mr. Putin these days, and we need to wake up from this dream and be much more effective. And hopefully help people like people in Belarus, where the Russian influence is causing such a misery, not only for civil society, but even from the point of view of living standard, as Aleš has mentioned a few minutes ago.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are at our closing time. We have still some questions left, but unfortunately, we don't have time to ask them. I wanted to thank very much all of our panelists for coming here. Aleš Beliacký, Jauhen Merkis, Viktoria Fedorova, Petras Auštrevičius, and Ludek Niedermayer. Thank you very much. I hope I hope the cooperation between European Union and Belarusian civil society will continue, and we will be able to somehow wait for or see the better future for Belarus. We wanted to end our discussion today with a short video of Aleš Beliacký receiving Homo Homini Prize in 2006 from President Václav Havel, and his encouraging word of hope for Belarus. And I don't think we have any other choice but to join those words and hope that his wishes for Belarus will come true very, very soon. Thank you very much for being with us today during this discussion, and we hope to see you at the next discussion during our online One World in Brussels. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Součástí slavnostního zahájení bylo i udělení ceny Homo Homini osobnostem, které se významně zasloužily o prosazování lidských práv.
Držitelem ceny Homo Homini za rok 2005 je pan Aleš Beliacký z Běloruska a organizace Vyjasna.
Aleš Beliacký je dlouholetý aktivista běloruských nezávislých iniciativ, který byl za svou činnost již několikrát souzen a zadržován. Cenu mu přišel předat Václav Havel, který demokratizační snahy běloruské opozice přirovnal k příběhu československých disidentů z dob totality.
Ten náš příběh dopadl dobře. Já jsem si jist, že i příběh běloruské demokratické opozice dopadne dobře.
І калі некалькі гадоў таму я патрапіў у міліцэйскі пастарунак, і паліцыянт, які запаўняў афіцыйны протакол, спытаўся: место работы? Я сказал: союз письменников. Он: кем работаете? Письменником. Он так посидел, подумал, а потом спытался: а что вы пишете? Я кажу: ну, все больше улетки, транспаранты, плакаты. Такие премии есть определенной черной меткой для белорусских властей, потому что это не есть премия за достижения в области культуры или искусства. Это премия, которая говорит о том, что в стране не все нормально с правами человека.
Těchto lidí je i Natália Sacunkevič, která přijde převzít za celou
will be receiving the award on behalf of the entire group from Vyjasna, the 4 detained members of Vyjasna. They are still in prison and they were not able to come themselves.
Thank you so much. And I hope it will be for your colleagues that are being persecuted. And this is the prize, Homo Homini.
I want to thank for this great high assessment of the work of my colleagues and your support for the Human Rights Center Vyjasna and for civil society of Belarus. It's very valuable award, and it's a clear message for Belarusian authorities that massive violations of human rights must be stopped immediately. In 2005, Human Rights Center Vyjasna and our leader, Aleš Beliacký, received the Homo Homini Award from Václav Havel. Since then, almost nothing has changed. Being a human rights defender in Belarus, protecting and promoting human rights is still a crime from the point of view of Belarusian authorities. We need help and support from the whole world and from each of you. I admire the courage and strength of my colleagues who in prison and bravely face the unknown future. poor living conditions, absurd criminal charges, illnesses and deaths of loved ones, information blockade, and many others. And I really look forward to the day when I can hug Marfa, Andrei, Leonid, and Tatiana, and laugh and cry with them together and free. And I'll tell them about this award and pass it from hand to hand. Thank you.